Share via email. Report story. Chapter 5. Ochako pushed open the door to the courtyard as silently as possible, letting it close softly behind her. There he was. Izuku hadn't noticed her yet. He would have, had his head not been tilted upward. His gaze was locked on the night sky above. He had said they should dress warm. Ochako had pulled on leggings, a sweater, and topped it with her pink windowpane scarf and thick cream overcoat. She couldn't use her quirk with gloves on, but had stuffed a pair of winter mittens in her coat pockets, just in case. As she'd left her room, Ochako had pulled her winter boots out of the closet and tugged them on. She thought she might have taken Izuku's suggestion too seriously, but was relieved to see him bundled up in his own heavy jacket with a checkered scarf wrapped under his chin. Still, she couldn't help being curious. It was a cloudless, chilly night, but not nearly cold enough for this many layers. What's Deku planning? Ochako allowed herself the indulgence of lingering in the doorway and watching him. Deku's mop of fluffy green hair was as unruly as ever. His eyes glistened with the casual thoughtfulness of someone who was always thinking about something. They were eyes that looked at the world and found all there was to discover. There was no denying the fluttering of her heart. For once, she didn't fight it. She would feel what she felt. Ochako owed herself that much. One way or another, she was going to tell Izuku how she felt tonight, and the conviction left her trembling inside. Butterflies the size of hedgehogs frolicked in her stomach. It was impossible not to be nervous. Ochako fumbled to hold on to the courage she'd found earlier that day. No regrets, she thought. She was brave. Whatever happened tonight, she would make herself face it, and that was that. Anxiously, she smoothed her coat, which didn't need smoothing, and straightened her scarf, which didn't need straightening. Deku seemed to be mumbling to himself now. Ochako saw his lips wrap around the same words again and again, repeating himself, like he was rehearsing for something. His eyes flashed with calculation as he looked upward. Izuku frowned. It'll have to do, she heard him whisper. He turned, saw her standing in the courtyard, and gave a start, his eyes widening with what seemed very close to panic. Ochako was glad to see it. The effort of keeping her own face calm had leapt tenfold as soon as his eyes touched her. Izuku recovered quickly. I didn't see you, flushing, he cut off, wiping his hands on his coat. Had Ochako not been so nervous herself, she might have laughed at the expression on his face. She gave a small smile, which helped take the edge off her nerves. Izuku responded with a slow grin which warmed his whole face. For a heartbeat, they just looked at each other, all fumbles and fidgets, sharing out embarrassed glances between them. Want some company? Ochako asked, grateful her voice sounded composed. Izuku nodded. I'd like that. She walked up beside him and turned her eyes skyward. Not a single cloud. The thin sliver of a waning moon hung in the sky, its grainy light doing little to obscure the thousands of tiny stars scattered across the night. They were on full display. Ochako couldn't help thinking about how many times they'd both looked up at this same night sky over the last couple weeks. Thanks for coming out. Of course, she replied, somehow managing to keep her voice from trembling. The butterflies were back, their wings beating for haste, but Ochako occupied herself with adjusting her scarf. No reason to go fast with this. If she just blurted out a confession immediately, it might scare him. She could take her time. Slow and steady, but her heart just wouldn't rest. Those thundering butterflies wouldn't let her hold back much longer. Promoted stories. You'll also like Zero Deku Onishots 31.2k 791. Because of circumstances, this book won't be continued unfortunately. Feel free to check out my other stuff. Thank you for understanding. Convicted Hearts 3390. Like my other story but ILI longer. Free. Onishots 149K3K. This is a collections of free X readers. Requests on this are now closed. Mirko X Shy Male Reader 164K 1.1 Key. Don't own MHA. I hope you enjoy the story I made. Feelings. Aizawa. X Reader 57.1K 1.3 KRE posting. This until I edit it. Sorry if it's not good, it's my first time writing a story. You enroll at UA and you have multiple quirks you are really good at using. Why? Return of Mokuden discontinued, 3.5K 45. This story is officially up for adoption. If anyone is interested, message me or comment on the story. The Heroes Return MHAXJJK, ongoing 113K 1.7K in Quad, Izuku. Midoriya, after being betrayed and killed, vanishes leaving hurt people behind. After 2 months and a hack, he come back, changed. How will the class re? Before Ochako could open her mouth to begin, Izuku spoke. So I had an idea of a way we could use our quirks TT together. I mean, if you wanted to try. We don't have to. Let's try it, Deku. Ochako blurted out, suddenly grateful for a little more time to calm herself. Izuku still seemed shaky. Alright, it might be rough, but I thought it all through, so it shouldn't be like last time when. What I mean is. Deku, Ochako said patiently. He had no reason to be nervous of his ideas. It's okay. Just tell me what you need me to do. Closing his eyes, Izuku took a long breath. As he exhaled, his whole posture seemed to straighten, his shoulders relaxed, and when he looked at Ochako, the curve of his lips was self-assured and confident. It was like a magic trick. Ochako had seen him transform this way countless times, in classes and training and beyond. It never failed to make her heart leap. In an instant, the insecure, kind, thoughtful boy metamorphosed into a reliable, quick-thinking, self-possessed champion. Izuku was dying to become a hero. Ochako wished he could see he already was one. Okay, he said. First, use your quirk to make yourself float. Then, I'll carry you on my back. Ochako's careful composure slipped. See carry. His eyes sparkled brilliantly. Trust me, he didn't even have to say it. Of course she trusted him. And when he accompanied his words with that smile, the one that said the sunrise was just over the horizon, the same smile he was giving her now, how could Ochako not trust him? Tapping the back of one hand with the fingertips of the other, Ochako felt her own gravity slip away. She floated over to Izuku. Fumbling with the unfamiliarity of it all, Ochako grabbed the back of his coat and used it to pull herself onto his back. He wrapped his arms under her knees and Ochako secured her arms around his shoulders, a weightless piggyback ride. This really shouldn't faze me after the other night, she desperately tried to reason. All the same, she was grateful Deku couldn't see her face. So much for calming herself. Her heart felt like it would burst through her chest if it didn't slow down. Alright Uraraka, now me. She felt the distant pull of nausea as she used her quirk on Izuku. Then, her equilibrium adjusted and the feeling disappeared like it never existed. She really had come a long way in just a few short weeks. A note of uncertainty entered Izuku's voice. You're not scared of heights, are you? I guess we'll find out, came her amused reply. Right, he chuckled. By now, Ochako had enough clues to work out what Deku was going to do. A memory from earlier that week flashed through her mind, of Izuku shooting upwards into the night and disappearing into the darkness, and it made her shiver. But he'd promised her he'd be careful from now on. Izuku wouldn't risk this unless he'd thought through all the details. Ochako relaxed, as much as she could while being carried on his back. Trust. She had to trust him. Unsurprisingly, she realized that she did. If something went wrong, they'd see it through together. There was a palpable charge as Izuku's quirk shot through his body. The air seemed thick with static. Energy surged and pulled at Ochako. Her hair prickled, her skin tingled. Is this what Deku feels when he uses his quirk? The power seemed to stabilize around him. He glanced back at her, brilliant emerald eyes completely at ease with the energy coursing through his body. Hang on tight. Ochako tightened her grip. Oh, he added suddenly. You might want to close your eyes, too. She closed them. Here goes, she heard him whisper, almost doubtfully. You got this, Deku, Ochako thought, as if her belief alone would help. Maybe it would. Izuku bent his knees, a rabbit ready to spring. Ready, ready. They rocketed upward. Ochako quickly tucked her chin down as cool night air raced past her face. The sound of wind was deafening. She screwed her eyes shut tighter. At this speed, she doubted she could force them open even if she wanted to. How high up are we? Came the distant thought. It had only been a second or two since they'd sprung upward, but she had no clue how fast they were going. Hang on. Izuku's shout was barely audible over the rush. He untangled an arm from under her knee. Instinctively, Ochako clamped herself hard around Izuku's back. The idea of falling off was too terrible to imagine. Then there was a resounding snap. Even over the wind, the sound reverberated in her ears. There was a change to their momentum. Were they slowing down? Snap. It was like a mini thunderclap. Snap, snap. Clap after thunderclap rang through the air, snap after snap, and with each snap Ochako could feel them slowing. Izuku was stalling their momentum, bit by bit. Ochako kept her head down and her eyes squeezed shut. As if the rush of takeoff had been a dream, the wind blowing past her face became a breeze, and then just a tickle. They'd stopped. She could feel her hair, which a second ago had been forced backward from their flight, now playfully floating in the suspended gravity. Izuku hadn't said anything yet. Could she open her eyes now? Uraraka. Izuku's breathless tone made her ears perk. Uraraka, are you seeing this? She opened her eyes. Her world was filled with magic. Stars. Stars like she'd never seen. More than she could possibly count. Sparkling distant light across the sky in a delicate parade of splendor like she could never have imagined. It was magic. With unblinking awe, Ochako realized she could see them twinkling. The stars were actually twinkling. How far up were they? It was a struggle, but Ochako tore her eyes away from the sky and looked back at the earth. We're so high, they couldn't have flown more than a few seconds. How strong was Deku's quirk, unhindered by gravity? A sat beneath them, a tiny collection of rectangles and squares. It looked less like a campus and more like a diagram on a map beyond the school. There was a swath of dark green, the forest, she realized. Eventually, the trees gave way to the city in the distance. Lights from the streets and tall buildings appeared diminished contrasted against the unfiltered starlight overhead. Ochako could see even beyond that, past rolling hills, onward to a long stretch of glimmering darkness she suspected was the sea. And there in front of her was Deku. She'd almost forgotten she was being carried. Izuku's head moved on an endless swivel, hair bouncing, taking it all in. He was just as awestruck as she was. They were both experiencing this together, sharing the discovery. Ochako couldn't waste this chance. She wanted to float through the sky. Gingerly, she untangled her arms from around Izuku's shoulder. As she pushed herself up, he unwrapped his arms from her knees, letting her float free. Ochako grabbed onto his hood. She couldn't help laughing as she softly tumbled, almost pulling Izuku along with her. He held up his arm for her to take. Ochako grabbed on, grateful to have her equilibrium restored. Delicately, she moved herself out along Izuku's outstretched arm. She clutched his coat sleeve like a lifeline, carefully moving hand over hand to his elbow, then down his forearm, until she reached his wrist and hand. She eased herself away from Izuku and out into the open air. Letting her limbs relax, she soon found herself floating in the middle of it all, cradled in the beauty of the universe. Ochako let herself drift. Her hair bounced about and tickled her face. The tips of her scarf gently waved about in the weightless breeze. Playfully kicking her feet, Ochako laughed at the way it rocked her softly back and forth. The patterning of starlight was a feast for her captivated eyes. She just couldn't take in enough. And there was so much variation. The sky wasn't just black, but a whole palette of colors. Deep blues, swirling in various tones and hues around each tiny pinpoint of illumination, framing their brilliance. Hints of faraway galaxies spilled across the starry backdrop. The stars, bursting, shining, dancing their way through the tapestry, shared their unselfish light with the boy and girl floating through the air. The only experience Ochako could draw upon that was remotely similar to this was when she traveled by plane to Ai Island with Momo and Jiro. It had been her first time on an airplane, and she'd spent the entire flight pressed against the window. Just watching, she'd been transfixed and engrossed in the earth moving beneath them and the endless stretch of sky. And yet, this experience was so much different. There was no plane, no glass, no walls, no floor, no ceiling. There was nothing to separate her. Ochako wasn't just an observer. She was part of this. Engulfed by it, landscapes stretched out underneath her feet. Uncountable stars beamed down at her from above, filling her bones with their distant fire. Izuku and her had soared into the sky and were one with the stars. A gust of night air breezed past her face, tossing her bangs. It really was cold at this altitude. It was a bright and refreshing cold, but it sent a shiver through her all the same. Izuku had been right to suggest dressing warm. He thought of everything, she mused. She felt the chill in her nose and in her hands. Reaching into her pocket to make sure her mittens were still there, Ochako had the realization that one of her hands didn't feel cold at all. The reason why struck her like a lightning bolt. She was still holding onto Izuku's hand. She'd never let go of it, eyeing him sideways. It didn't seem Izuku had noticed. He floated next to her, amazed and captivated by the night sky. Ochako looked at their hands entwined between them. Deku's hand felt warm, and gentle, and safe. Maybe, she thought bashfully, she should let go before he noticed. She hadn't even confessed to him yet, and here she was hanging onto his hand. There was no danger in letting go. Even if they drifted apart, she was sure Izuku could maneuver back to her with his quirk. Yes, sharing this experience was enough indulgence for now. She shouldn't stretch this. Her heart jolted as Izuku's face changed. His eyes widened. Turning his head slowly, he looked at his fingers tangled with hers. As their eyes met, the butterflies in Ochako's stomach returned with a vengeance. Their fluttering wings beat like drums. For a couple nerve-wracked heartbeats, Izuku stared at her, expressionless, and Ochako simply stared back. Then she saw him inhale deeply, and Izuku's expression changed. It started at the corners of his mouth, and then grew to a flimsy half-smile. His grin continued to grow until it turned into a full, hopeful smile that stretched both his cheeks. In the starlight, Izuku's eyes glistened like emerald marbles, and he gave her hand an affectionate squeeze. Ochako's breath caught in her throat. There, in the light of his eyes and the warmth of that smile, she finally saw it. Ochako saw the mirrored reflection of her own feelings. She thought back on every time she'd found Izuku flustered, every time she'd found him with flushed cheeks, and finally saw it for what it was. Deku feels it too. How had she not noticed before? Her heart leapt up on butterfly wings. Beaming, she squeezed his hand back. She almost giggled at the spots of color showing around his freckles. His cheeks are so red. Ochako knew she was blushing too, blushing enough for both of them, and she didn't bother to hide it this time, they'd blush together. Ochako and Izuku were floating in starlight, squeezing each other's hands and smiling, quite unable to stop. Feelings bubbled over, and Ochako had to say something. Anything. She didn't have to confess her feelings yet. Gosh, she just wanted to tell him. No, this was enough, for now, but she had to let out something. Deku, I. Ochako's throat caught. He tilted his head at her, unable to make out what she'd said. She'd spoken too softly. Her voice had been lost in the night air. Ochako squared her shoulders. Steeling herself with a wide, faultless grin, she shouted, Deku. I'm so happy I get to share this with you. Izuku's whole face lit up like a north star. This was all new. This was scary, but it was shared. They felt each other tremble, and whether it was from relief or the chill night air, neither of them knew. Hang on, he called, as if she could possibly let go now. Izuku held his other hand out, and pointed it away from them. His arm lit up with the faint glow of his quirk, crisscrossed lines of energy rippling down to his hand. Delicately, he braced finger against thumb, and snapped. Not hard, just enough. Laughter spilled from Ochako's lips as they soared through the night. She'd seen heroes use their quirks to propel themselves countless times, but she'd never imagined how exhilarating it would feel. This wasn't like bouncing around the walls of the courtyard. Ochako felt free, untethered to every fear she'd had before. As they soared along, she stretched out her arm and legs, feeling the wind ripple along her coat and tossing her hair. It was like she was flying. Actually flying. Ahead of her, Izuku maneuvered them carefully. The earth flowed by beneath them. The stars twinkled, appearing so close that Ochako thought she could reach out and grab one. Gracefully, Deku began looping them downward in a wide spiral, back to the earth, back to the dorms, back to everything they knew. But things couldn't just go back to the way they had been, could they? How long it took them to finally descend back to Heights Alliance, Ochako didn't know. She didn't care. There was no hurry. She wanted to hang on as long as she could. When Izuku had them positioned just a whisper off the grass in the courtyard, Ochako reluctantly let go of his hand. She pressed her fingertips together and they landed softly on their feet. They took a moment, just gathering their breath, taking it all in, processing it all. Ochako smoothed her hair, while Izuku fussed with his coat. Ochako had to tell him. This was the moment. She could feel it in her bones. But her mind had become a roaring white blank of stage fright. In one last effort to buy time, just to gather her thoughts and remember everything she planned to tell him, Ochako asked Izuku, "That was amazing. What made you have an idea like that?" Izuku looked down. A nervous smile twitched the corners of his mouth, and his hand rose to rub the back of his shaggy head. "It's okay, Deku," Ochako thought, "take your time." She desperately tried to piece together the words she'd rehearsed earlier that day. She wouldn't lose her voice this time. She wouldn't forget the delicate things she wanted to tell him. Even if she did forget, Ochako was determined to simply blurt it out if she had to. "Do you remember," Izuku began, "when you stopped me from falling outside the entrance exam?" She beamed encouragement at him, her smile stretching cheek to cheek. Of course she remembered. He looked up at her. "Then during the entrance exam, you saved me again." Ochako decided not to interject that he was the one who had actually saved her that day. "And it's not just that. You're brave, and strong, and these last couple weeks have made me realize just how much." He trailed off, looking down again with a quick, timid exhale. Waiting patiently, Ochako readied herself. As soon as Izuku was done, she was going to tell him. "Courage," she tenderly reassured herself. "You can do this." With a sudden inhale of breath, Izuku shot his eyes up to meet hers. "All Might once told me, Heroes not only save people, they save their hearts too. Ochako went still. What was Izuku trying to say? They save their hearts too. You're always saving me, whether you mean to or not. I don't know how you do it. You make all my doubts just disappear. Every time things get difficult, you're always there. Giving your all. Never giving up. You're my hero, Uraraka. Izuku's cheeks reddened, but he faced her firmly even so he looked so certain of what he said, what he felt. The open honesty in Deku's eyes punctuated every word. Flowers bloomed in her heart. You make me feel like I can fly. I wanted to share that feeling with you, too. Silence surrounded them. The stars danced quietly overhead. Ochako didn't have to think about what she did next. Without really realizing it, Ochako closed the space between them until their feet almost touched. Hesitantly reaching out, she gently pulled Izuku's hand into her own. She looked at him, brown eyes staring into green, the unspoken question running between them like a breeze. She saw Izuku's lips tighten. Ochako felt short of breath. He didn't blink, neither did she. The whole world stood still. No regrets. She found herself both tremendously brave and terribly vulnerable. You really are amazing, Deku. Ochako closed her eyes as she rose up on her toes, and softly pressed her lips to Izuku's. It was a timid kiss, soothing and comforting. Emotions swirled. Relief, disbelief, and wonder coursed through Ochako as she felt the softness of Deku's lips against her own. It was suddenly difficult to stand. Her legs didn't seem to want to hold her upright. Her heart beat frantically. Some time later, she wasn't sure how long, Ochako pulled away, sinking gingerly back onto her heels, lamenting the loss of connection. The reality of what she'd done flashed through Ochako's mind. Blood rushed to her cheeks. That had been more forward than she'd ever dreamed of being, just walking up and kissing him. What about all the carefully rehearsed, delicate remarks she'd prepared? She was still holding his hand. Please, she begged, don't let Deku feel me shaking. She was frozen, too terrified to open her eyes. What was she supposed to do now? Before Ochako could let her mind run away any further, she felt Izuku press his lips back to hers. A little clumsier, but still gentle. Still comforting. She squeezed his hand, and felt him squeeze back. Her head spun. Her toes tried to curl up in her boots. Ochako swore she felt the stars shining brighter. The universe leaned in a little closer. Tenderly, Izuku pulled back. Ochako felt the lingering absence of his lips. The walls they had both built to keep their feelings locked away crumbled into dust. Every doubt fled. If the first two had been delicate, their next kiss became something else. There was a rush as their lips met again, perhaps more forcefully than either of them intended. Every feeling they had tried to silence spilled out. Neither of them gave ground. Ochako felt Izuku's arms warp around her back, gingerly pulling her in, and she found her hands gripping his arms, pressing delicately back into him. Staying that way would have been all too easy. It was impossible to tell how long it lasted. Finally, their lips parted. They both took heavy breaths, trying to gulp air back into their lungs. Ochako felt Izuku's forehead softly collapse onto her own. A relieved smile pulled at the corners of her mouth. The hammering of her heart began to settle. She felt like she was floating. Ochako let her eyes flutter open. She blinked. They were floating. Without realizing it, she'd used her quirk. They were suspended a half-meter off the grass, with neither of them having noticed. Light, airy giggles escaped from Ochako and she heard Izuku's whispered laughter echoing with hers. Tension melted away. Her smiles just wouldn't stop. Why had she ever been so scared? I guess, she said quietly, you really do like me. I really do, came his vulnerable reply, and she knew he meant it. Ochako was glad to hear a touch of her own breathlessness in his voice. Reluctantly, she let go of his coat sleeves. She pressed her fingertips together and released her quirk. Gravity returned. They peacefully touched back down onto the grass. Ochako raised her chin to find Izuku just opening his eyes, a big, goofy smile plastered on his face. His scarf had gone all askew, and she beamed while reaching up to smooth it out. Izuku shifted on his feet, as if testing if this was real. His face was so close. Ochako could count every freckle. She couldn't help studying the depths of emerald green swirling in his eyes as he gazed back at her. In a heartbeat, reality silently crashed down upon Ochako like a wave. Her hands froze on his scarf. She and Izuku were in each other's arms, staring into each other's eyes, and they had just. Ochako felt her hair prickling as her cheeks filled with warmth. Izuku's eyes slowly widened. The dusting of color on his cheeks rapidly flooded his entire face, and Ochako didn't need to see her reflection in his eyes to know her own face had become bright as a cherry. They let go of each other, Ochako quickly backpedaling towards the doors to the dorms. She waved her hands frantically in an attempt to hide the embarrassment blossoming on her face, stumbling over her words even as she tried not to stumble over her own 2 feet. Well, I better get off to bed. That was really good, Deku. She winced when she realized the double meaning, and hastened to add, using our quirks together, I mean. Alright, of course. Good night, Uraraka. Good night, good night. She slipped hurriedly through the doors and disappeared. Izuku stared after her in wide-eyed wonder, face burning. He reached up to pump the collar of his coat. Even while tripping over his own tongue, he'd managed to do it. He'd opened his heart to her. And Uraraka had kissed him. And he had kissed her back. It didn't feel real, but he was certain this wasn't a dream. His head buzzed. Izuku felt so hot he thought his hair would burst into flames. Then, unexpectedly, Izuku began to chuckle. It started as a light giggle rippling up from his chest. Steadily, it picked up, it grew and grew until he had to cover his mouth to keep his laughter from bouncing off the walls. All the tension flowed out of him. Izuku hadn't realized how much he'd been holding in. Relief washed over him. My first kiss, he thought elatedly. My first kiss was with Uraraka. A few floors above him, Ochako pressed her face into her pillow, trying to muffle the sounds of her own uncontrollable giggles and squealing. She'd barely kicked her boots off before throwing herself onto the bed, excitedly beating her feet against the sheets. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed this hard. I kissed Deku, she thought joyously. Then he kissed me back. And then we. Back in the courtyard, Izuku caught his breath while leaning against the wall. He'd laughed until his sides hurt, and now he was all giddiness. He felt like he could take on any exam, any test, any villain. A yawn tried to rumble up from his throat, making him aware of how tired he really was. Izuku lingered a heartbeat longer. He took one last look up at the stars. Then, he slipped back into Heights Alliance. As he snuck back up the stairs to his room, each step felt light, as if he was still floating through the sky. Back in his room, Izuku quickly pulled off his coat and scarf. He slipped off his shoes, changed into his sleep clothes, and flopped down on top of his sheets with a cheerful sigh, legs spread akimbo. As he felt sleep sneaking up on him, he gazed up at the ceiling. He wondered what tomorrow would be like for Uraraka and him. His mind took off. Would he be able to focus on classes without getting distracted? Would Uraraka mind if they walked to class together? Would she tell anyone? Should he tell anyone? What if Uraraka had just been caught up in the moment? Why would? The dim light and buzzing of his phone silenced his insecurities. Izuku squinted as he held the bright screen to his face. Deku. Are you still awake? The tiny picture of Uraraka's smiling face next to her message made Izuku's chest light. His fingers shook as he tapped out a simple reply. Yeah. Ellipsis bounced alongside Uraraka's picture as she wrote back. Izuku's eyes stayed locked on the three little dots, his heart hammering as he waited. It seemed an eternity before her message popped onto the screen. Can we do that again? On the other side of the dorm, a few floors up, Ochako laid on her stomach. Her face was still buried in her pillow. Only her eyes peeked over the top at her phone. She couldn't help giggling as the ellipsis next to Izuku's picture appeared, then disappeared, and reappeared again, all in rapid succession. If he was feeling even a fraction of what Ochako was, she couldn't blame him for being flustered. Her face flushed anew as his reply popped into their chat. Do you mean the flying? Or, Ochako briskly, giddily tapped out her response. Both. She hit send. Ochako's heart blasted into orbit. End. Where stories live. Discover now.